Hello, good morning. So this is my first shot at trying to do a sort of useful tips kind of video. Aimed more at like newer players, aimed at people who know how to play but don't necessarily feel like they know what they're doing yet, right? Because while learning the initial rules is one thing, there's a big learning curve between knowing the rules of the game, know how to operationally play a game, and really sort of playing a relatively strategically sound game, right? A lot of players will just kind of play cards without clearly knowing why or how or what the purpose behind what they're doing is. And so I just kind of wanted to touch on that, very broadly as a starting video here. It's hard to get into too many specifics, because at the end of the day, most specific decisions about this game strategically are very situational. It comes down to what's your deck, what's your opponent's deck, what cards are in your hand, how many cards are in their hand, what cards are in the stages, and so on. But even despite that, even though it's hard to make videos that really get into nitty-gritty strategy stuff, it should still be possible to do a few things that are just kind of like big, broad topics, I hope. So we're going to tackle that today in talking about just sort of types of turns in a big picture sense. What kinds of turns can people have in this game that are sort of useful and productive, and why you might do different ones, why you might take different approaches. And the hope is here that for people that are still starting out, maybe before you start playing cards on your turn, just take a moment, don't go crazy, don't try to spend 5 minutes in the think tank on this, but take a minute and just think about what you're trying to do this turn. What kind of turn am I trying to have? And then let that drive what cards you're choosing to play. And then hopefully by doing that, you can both hopefully immediately improve the quality of your games, win more games, be in more games, that sort of thing. But also sort of makes it a little bit easier to dissect afterwards. Like, well, I was trying to do this turn. Did I approach what I was trying to do wrong? Or should I have been trying to do a different kind of turn? And just gives you a little bit of a framing for thinking about stuff, I hope. So, big picture, there's going to be a lot of stating the obvious here. If you really want to abstract it out, there are 3 types of turns in this game. Either you're killing your opponent, you're not attacking at all, or you're doing some attacking without killing them, right? And that all sounds very obvious, but there is this sort of a range of risk in that last one where you're attacking the opponent, you're not going to kill them, but how much attacking are you doing? Are you just doing one little, we call it a poke attack a lot of the time, where you're playing an attack to try to get something out of it, but you're still trying to really focus on keeping your defenses up? Or are you just throwing caution to the wind and playing every attack you can? Who cares what stuff I'm holding back? Who cares how many foundations I commit, because I want to just throw everything at the wall because XYZ. So you get a lot in that range where you can kind of go halfway, 2/3 of the way, that sort of thing. But I just want to kind of talk about the extremes of that and the other 2 types of turn just broadly. And hopefully people can take it from there, right? So first things first, a kill turn. When and why you would do a kill turn is kind of obvious. You kill them when you are pretty sure you can kill them, right? If you look at your hand and you look at the board situation, you're like, I win this turn, or I'm 80-90% to win this turn, whatever you're comfortable with, then you say, okay, we're trying to do a kill turn. What do I need to do if I am in here to kill the opponent and win right now? And just some important parts of that real quick. Count your damage. Make sure you actually do have enough damage to kill them. And when you're doing this, factor in blocks. You obviously can't always know exactly what they're going to block and when and what kinds of blocks are in their hand, and there is an experience factor here to getting used to guessing more right about that stuff. But even if you're new and you're not sure at all, just assume, okay, what if they block my biggest move? How much damage do I do? And what if they block 2 moves? And kind of look at how many foundations they have up and guess at how many they can probably block. You also want to make sure you know your checks, know what kinds of checks you need. If you need to check 5 checks to pull this off, then it's probably not a very viable kill turn. But if you can do, if half your checks can be 3s and you're still fine, then you probably feel safe going for it, right? And last, just do a quick check, read their cards, read the stuff in your opponent's stage, look for any defensive abilities that might mess you up. Meta locals or something, you could just ask your opponent if you're new and they know you're new. They'll tell you like, hey, this card might be relevant, this card might be relevant. So long as you don't have weird hyper-competitive locals or something like that. But yeah, just do a quick spot check, make sure there's nothing that's going to surprise you and like, oh wait, I didn't think about that ability, right? And sort of diffuse your kill turn. So just do the basic checkup if you think you have a kill turn and make sure you have a kill turn, and then yeah, you go for it, right? If you look at everything, you're like, yeah, I got this. The hard part is when you're not going to have a kill turn, right? If you are not killing them this turn, then, you know, again, kind of stating the obvious, your goal is to improve your odds of winning the game. Very vaguely, right? You want to move yourself closer to winning the game, and ideally do more to move yourself closer to winning than you do to move yourself closer to losing, because, you know, if you spend cards from your hand that you could have blocked with, if you commit foundations, right, that sort of thing, then anything like that you end up doing is going to increase your odds of losing the game, right? It's going to make it easier for your opponent to attack you and either deal a bunch of damage to you and move them closer to winning, or it might increase the chance that you might just die outright, right? So big picture, that's kind of what we're trying to do if we know we're not killing them. And there's a wide range of things we might decide to do to try to do that. So on the far end of sort of the safe attacking spectrum is the poke turn. This is where you're playing 1, maybe 2 attacks that, you know, you feel okay if you check a 3 on one of them, that sort of thing. And the idea here is to ideally deal some damage and get some momentum. And if you don't do that, you're hoping, as a backup, you're hoping that they block with cards that they want in their hand, right? If you play a poke attack, even if it doesn't land, if they block with their best attack, great, right? If they block with the best attack in their deck and that's what you got for playing your little poke, that's fantastic, right? So you might poke just to get useful cards out of their hand and you diminish their offense coming back at you. You sort of improved your defensive positioning even though you just attacked, right? You could also have a situation where you get some value out of having enhanced steps, block steps, that sort of thing. You know, you could have the classic enhanced draw 1 card sitting on an attack in your hand and say, well, you know, might as well play this poke. I'll get the card back, and maybe they block it with something they care about. Maybe it deals damage. This is all good stuff, right? So there's lots of reasons to poke. I would say, I don't want to put a number on it because it depends on the decks, of course, but very often, especially the kinds of decks you're going to be playing starting out, it is very often worth doing at least a little poking on most of your turns. Even if, you know, you're not really sure what's going to happen, you just gotta knock on the door and see what you get out of it, right? It's good for experience too. But the big picture here is you're poking because you're trying not to die, right? You're trying to progress your game state, right? You're trying to move closer to winning. But it is also very important to you that you are not sacrificing too much defense in the process, right? That is why you would poke. That is why a lot of turns are poke turns, is because, you know, people are trying to be proactive and do stuff and move closer to winning, but they're also trying to play good defense on the backside. But sometimes even that poke feels like it's not worth it, and you can just do a build turn where you just play foundations and pass. And this is not, I wouldn't describe this as super common, but it's not rare at all. There are certainly plenty of games where it's going to make sense to do a build turn. And, you know, if you're watching a stream match or something, you'll see people doing build turns for sure. And there's a bunch of reasons why you might, they're not, you know, most of them are not super common, but they all happen. One thing is you might be trying to craft a hand. You might be in a situation where you know your poke's not going to land, and you think your odds of getting a useful card out of their hand for it aren't that great. Or even if they are, maybe you just don't want to make the trade, right? Because you might sit there thinking, like, the only way I win this game, or I will win this game if I get 5 attacks in my hand. Right? You could be in that sort of situation, and then you might be doing what we call crafting a hand, which is you're holding onto your attacks, waiting to draw more attacks, right? And then when you do, you're planning to win. And of course, if you have 2 attacks in your hand and you play 1 each turn, right, you poke with an attack, then your odds of getting to those 5 attacks if you're draining 1 out of your hand every turn are not that great. So you do a build turn, maybe 2 build turns in a row, trying to craft that winning hand. Another thing that might happen is you might have a bunch of foundations you want to play that have relatively high difficulty. And if you poke first, if you have a 3-diff and a 2-diff and a 2-diff foundations that you want to play, and you throw a 5-diff poke and then a 3-2-2, you might end up having to commit a bunch of foundations for that if you don't check very well. And that can kind of put you in an awkward position. So it could be that when you factor in the foundations that you want to play this turn, the poke just adds a little too much risk of bad checks that you just go ahead and play your foundations and pass. You also might need the blocks that are on your attacks, so you don't want to play any of them. Right, you look at your hand, all your foundations are mid blocks, and their scariest attacks are high blocks, and your only attack in your hand has a high block on it, then you're not going to throw it because you need the high block, you know, to defend yourself. So you might just do it for that reason. I think you could have a situation where the rival benefits from you attacking more than you do. This is not mega common, but it happens. You know, they could have defensive abilities that are really valuable to them, and you don't really have anything that you get where you get stuff just by attacking. And again, you have to feel pretty certain that they're going to block with a card they don't care about, or again, that trade, if you trade for a card they do care about, that's still not as good as just not giving them those abilities. Or you could think they're holding a pile of foundations. They're holding like 3 cards that they don't want in their hand because they're worried about deadlock or something like that. And then you might just build and pass just to stick those cards in their hand, because if you attack, they're just going to get to block with a card they don't want anyway. You're giving them what they call bonus review step, right? That's a tough read to make. That, you know, a lot of these take experience, right? But I'm just kind of going over the why they might happen, and then, you know, when it comes up in games, you might recognize it, that sort of thing. Last thing, you might see some players do like build pass turns just to turtle. Just to say, well, if I sit here and build and pass and build and pass and build and pass, I don't think you can do anything to me, right? That they think that they have a big defensive edge over the offense of the other deck. And they decide to we're just not going to take any risks whatsoever. We're not even going to play anything we might have to commit a foundation for, because as long as we just sit here and hyper turtle, they can't kill us. And importantly, you have to be pretty sure that you're going to win too, right? If your opponent can't kill you if you just sit there, that's great. But if you can't kill them if they just sit there, then you're just sort of walking into this stalemate. And you should probably be trying to make something happen, because they might have a way to make something happen, even if it's very, very slowly. So you want to be careful if you decide to just sit there and turtle. A lot of times, if you turtle when you shouldn't, you're just giving your opponent free time to craft a hand that actually can kill you, or to do useful poke turns or that sorts of stuff. So this is a dangerous call to make, but sometimes you do have that big edge where you know you are inevitably going to win, and you know they cannot kill you unless you give them the opportunity. And the last sort of extreme type of turn is the sellout turn. So this is where we have 4 attacks and we're just going to play all of them. We don't care how many foundations we commit. We don't care what blocks are left in our hand. We don't care, you know, what resources we spend here. We're just throwing everything. But we know we're not killing them. We're just throwing everything anyway. Right? We know we're very likely not to kill them. So the most of the time you're doing this, you're desperate in some way. The one time you're maybe not is if you just decide it's worth gambling on them not having a good swing back. So you think, if I send everything, I can put them at a low health total, and I know they won't kill me, and I just want to bet on winning next turn after that. You can make that call. It's not the greatest of calls, because you're going to be drawing a fresh new hand next turn, but if your character maybe helps you out with that or something. There are decks and situations that just like to do this, where if they see an opponent that they don't think can kill them, they'll just throw everything and gamble on it. So that's something that comes up. But, again, it's a gamble. If you're going to be making that call, it's a judgment call. You better be right, etc., right? The more desperation situation you don't really want to be in, but these all happen. You could have a situation where you're kind of dead to any meaningful attack turn, and you just cannot let your opponent sit there and craft a hand, or you will lose. And craft like any kind of a hand, right? And you think they're holding a couple attacks, you know if they draw 1 or 2 more, you're just going to die, and you just kind of throw everything. You try to make them block with everything in their hand, and hope that they don't draw enough after that. So those situations come up where you just need to empty their hand out, because what's in their hand plus what they draw is probably going to kill you if you don't make them do a fresh draw and hope they brick. You could also have a situation where your only real hope is to, yeah, I need 5/5s to do this, but I'm not going to win the game anyway, any other way, so I'm just going to kind of pray that I check the 5 running 5s. That's, you can just take this low odds bet, or hope that their block zones are actually secretly really bad in their hand, that sort of thing. And lastly, you could end up in that situation where you were talking about before about turtling. If you have a huge defensive edge on your opponent and you know you have inevitability, well, if you're on the wrong side of that, if your opponent's doing that to you, and they're going to block literally everything you throw unless you throw a big pile of attacks, and you're not going to be able to craft a hand that's good enough to kill them in one turn, then it could be that your only way out is to do a sellout turn and get some damage in and understand that you have no defense on the other side of this. And again, just kind of hope they don't draw good enough to kill you for it. And then if you make it to your next turn alive, maybe you get lucky and now, you couldn't deal 26 in one turn, but maybe you can do 14, right? And that sort of energy. Again, not a situation you want to be in, but it's something that you might do. And one of the reasons that these big sellout turns aren't very common is because this is a spectrum, right? You can do some attacking on your turn. You can be a little bit dangerous without completely selling out. You can live in the middle right of this bar, right? Where you're playing 3 attacks, maybe 2, depending on how you check, and representing some defense. So you can block like 1 thing, maybe 2 things, that sort of idea. And so that's why you don't see too many big full sellout turns, because a lot of the reasons you might try to do a sellout turn can sometimes materialize midway through the attack. The opponent takes something you weren't expecting them to take, that kind of thing. But you do have that range, and deciding where to be on that risk spectrum is very hard. It's definitely an experience thing. But just be aware of what you're trying to do, right? The big picture here is just to kind of talk about different types of turns, and before you start playing cards, think about what you're trying to do with this turn. What is your goal? What are you hoping to accomplish? What is your defense going to look like afterwards? That sort of thing. And do things intentionally, right? So that wraps it up for this kind of turn types talk. I'm hoping this is useful to people. I don't really know if it is or isn't going to be, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you think this can be helpful to some of your playgroup members, go ahead and share it around. If you have ideas for other topics you think can be maybe usefully talked about in a big picture like this, go ahead and let me know. I have like a couple other ideas. I don't think there are too many that really work for this, but for where it does, we might as well, right? Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.